say hello, leavers, believers, and everybody. Welcome back to Leaving Hillsong. My name's Tanya, and this week we're going to be doing something a little bit different again. Because we're going to be looking at various aspects of mental health, I thought it'd be really important to start at the very beginning and just have a look at counselling outside of the church. For a lot of people, they don't like to take anything sacred outside Christian circles. And so I had a chat with a mental health social worker who happens to be a Christian. Her name is Petra, and I really gave her a hard time about how you can have faith, have a profession, and be able to help people who are Christians and people who aren't. And the answers were really, really interesting. So I hope you enjoyed this really off-the-cuff chat about mental health, God, Jesus, social work, and everything else. And I hope it's useful for you or someone you know. Here's a journey they take for themselves. Hi, Petra.
Hi, Tanya. How are you?
Doing good. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thanks.
Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Here at Leaving Hillsong. This is a bit of a different one because you and I really haven't spent any time at all talking to each other. So I'm going to be learning as we go.
Me too.
Thank you. So, well, let's kick off with, tell me a little bit about you today and how you got there. So you're a counsellor.
Yep, I'm a mental health social worker.
Okay.
So for many, many years, I worked as a social worker in public mental health, in adult mental health, but also in aged mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And then for a while, I worked in palliative care for 6 years in community palliative care, which was fantastic, working nurses and other, mainly social workers, working with people and their families as a person who was dying, and working with this and supporting the families and offering bereavement counselling afterwards. And then I decided, well, I'd really like to take off on my own. So I applied to become a mental health social worker through the Australian Association of Social Work.
Wonderful.
And now I run my own little private practice.
Oh, fantastic.
Fantastic.
So have you had areas of special interest or expertise? I mean, you were just doing palliative care. What takes you at the moment? You're working with people experiencing bereavement stuff now.
I do a bit of that. I also I'm really interested in older people and their mental health. So, and offering counselling often in nursing homes, and carers who are caring for older people or people with disabilities or their spouses.
There's not enough resources going towards any of these, hey?
No, there isn't. There's a few things actually in New South Wales at the moment where Anglicare has a brief to go into nursing homes and offer counselling up to 6 sessions. And because since the COVID outbreak, mental health social workers and psychologists can go into aged care facilities and offer counselling and with a rebate from Medicare. But there's not much, especially for carers either. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Well, you must have seen some pretty tough things in your time then, the whole range. Wow.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, I mean, I'm just thinking now there's probably pretty tough, probably not a lot of stuff you're scared of taking on at this point. Hey, if you've done 6 years of palliative care, does it get tougher than that? I don't know.
I think it does in private practice. You've got other things to worry about because you've got no one to back you up. So you have to do risk assessments and, you don't know who's going to walk through the door. What am I afraid of? I was just thinking of, you don't know what you don't know, but you're scared that you don't know everything. So, and you don't know everything. So a good basis and a good range of skills to offer people.
I don't know that I could. I mean, I understand the palliative care stuff, that staff find it incredibly rewarding.
Oh, it is. It's incredible. And it's not as scary as you think. You know, people are people, and when they're facing death, you know, you get the range of emotions and reactions from people who will work with you and want to work with you, especially on their spiritual stuff. And then people will go, nah, don't want anything to do with you, and I'm not dying. So I don't want palliative care.
So I don't know that there are tougher kind of spiritual moments to take on or encounter either then, are there? I mean, that's as real as it gets, isn't it?
That's as real as it gets, and it's really interesting, palliative care. My anecdotal evidence was that there are Christians out there doing palliative care and Buddhists. They are both willing to face the concept of suffering.
Right. So it's not just death, but suffering. Okay.
Suffering and death, yeah. So, yeah, it was really interesting. And it was the first time really that I was allowed to bring in the spiritual in my assessment. So we talked about biopsychosocial spiritual assessments.
All right. Okay.
In the secular public mental health system, you didn't go there. You didn't touch the spiritual.
You wouldn't be allowed to really deny people that in palliative care, like, you know.
No, you shouldn't be denying it in severe mental health either. You might not be religious, but you could be spiritual. I think we're all spiritual.
Interesting.
But I wouldn't push that on someone if they didn't think they were spiritual.
Let's drag you back to our questions on the show. You're not from Hillsong, though?
No, I've never actually been to a Hillsong.
Was it Dutch Reform that you went to growing up?
Yep, grew up in the Reformed Church.
Okay.
I can say it in a Dutch accent too.
You didn't grow up in an evangelical church.
I grew up with lots of evangelicals. I went to a Christian school.
Oh.
So.
Okay, so and you went to a Dutch Reformed church growing up.
Who set up the Christian schools. So
the
Christian school movement was set up by the Reformed Church people.
Where was this?
All over Australia. They set up the Christian Education Network. Yeah, so lots of the Christian schools around, not all of them, not the Pentecostal ones or the church schools, but the ones who are parent-controlled Christian schools, as they used to be called, were, the brainchild of many a Dutch Reformed church.
As we were talking about just before, the Dutch Reformed Church were very strong in South Africa and responsible for a lot of apartheid practices. There were justifications for racism that they used.
There were, and I think the Australian Reformed Church were one step removed from, like a huge step removed from the Afrikaner Reformed Church. They were migrants straight from Holland, not from South Africa.
Right, of course. Yeah. What was that like growing up there? Is it? I won't ask.
Look, it was good, but it was very good Bible teaching, really good Bible teaching, really great community, but it was very much a closed community in a way, a little bit like other, fundamental churches. And what we were taught what the Reformed Church believed was correct and right, and you couldn't argue.
I mean, that's a common thread, isn't it? I mean,
isn't it? And women had their place. And at 21, I went, I don't know if I can do this anymore. So I was doubting, and that was good.
I mean, I'm guessing there's not a lot of room to doubt in that system or anyone to go and have a chat to about it.
You can't question. And as a woman, there's no official avenues because you're not part of whatever, the deacon or synod. That is to say, though, that apparently things are different now. So I can't comment on now. That was 30 years ago.
All right. So you start doubting at age 21. What had led to that? Are your family involved and everything?
The minister used to call my mum a feminist Christian feminist, which she wore as a badge of honor. My mum was amazing that way. She was a sociologist, social worker as well. So she was a little bit more educated than I guess the average person in the Reformed Church. But they stayed. Mum and Dad stayed, but they were a bit concerned when I did leave. You know, if I was going to go Anglican or something, that would have been okay. But I went Baptist. So.
Oh, okay. So you said to them, like, I'm still a Christian, but this church isn't for me.
Yeah, this isn't for me. Yeah. So
because
it was very, very difficult for them. But
conservative, that kind of thing.
I went straight to a very. Have you heard of Tim Costello?
Yes.
I went to the church that he was running, him and his wife, in St Kilda, and it was amazing.
Oh, sorry, what are they? They're Baptists, yeah?
Baptist, but very social justice orientated.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So
very different, isn't it? In some really
very different. So I felt at home. Yeah. You're allowed to doubt, you're allowed to question, you're allowed to rejoice and be happy as well, you know.
Well, like human range of human stuff.
Yep.
And then is that where you are now? Like, is that what happens after that?
What happens after St Kilda Baptist? I couldn't afford to live in that area anymore. So we went to eastern suburbs, suburbia in Melbourne. So a range of churches, but now we're at a uniting church and we're feeling very much at home. Yeah.
Lovely.
No, the last 17 years we were at, do you remember John Smith and the bikie gang, the God Squad? Yeah, so we were at a sort of that church. It was quite a social justice,
the same sort of thing, yeah.
Community stuff, community-based stuff. I went to TLC for 17 years. Fantastic church in outer east suburbia, Melbourne.
I'm wondering how much more liberating those kinds of environments were for you compared with the growing up experience.
Oh, no comparison whatsoever. No comparison. You know. Absolutely freeing, absolutely, you know, being at home, feeling at home. Yeah, just going, yeah, these are my people. This is my tribe.
Was there a conversion experience along the way?
No, I guess I came to faith in my teens saying, yep, I do believe this stuff. I tried not believing for a while at uni.
Okay.
I thought, yeah, you know, I've got to try not to believe, but it didn't work. I do actually believe that there's something bigger than just me and that it's important to be connected to other.
Awesome. All right.
Yeah, I do believe in Jesus. I definitely, yeah. And I know while I'm pretty left wing, I've got to say that. Am I allowed to say that? I do walk, like we talked about before, I walk a very tight rope of belief in definitely the fundamentals that Jesus died, rose again, died for my sins, but not just my sins, not just me, hallelujah, but us. A lot more us than just me. Yeah, so I get really, I've got to say that I've never really liked Hillsong songs. I know that might be a little bit radical to say, but it's all about me, hallelujah, amen.
Okay.
TLC has their own brand of music.
Okay.
There's some really fantastic songwriters out there, apart from Hillsong, who write some really good songs.
Like,
and there's hymns. There's the old-fashioned hymns. Don't mind an old-fashioned hymn.
What one that isn't like Jesus is my boyfriend kind of thing?
Yeah, never quite got that. That creeped me out.
Do you start studying straight after school? You jump into social work?
Yep, straight into social work.
Unbelievable.
It was a bit early.
Who
would have done that? Yeah, it was a bit early.
Okay, so this is interesting. So you've come to a kind of a place, like a fairly firm place about your spiritual beliefs and your profession as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Starting in mental health early on as well. I mean, you've grounded yourself in these things, and
my vocation, I think, started when I went to St Kilda Baptist, and we would be in church with people with severe mental illnesses who came from the local boarding house, and we would be in community with them. And I went, I want to work in mental health. I did not know what I was expecting, and it was full on, but it was good.
Yeah, it can be just so cruel and unjust. Hey, and
it is, and you feel like sometimes you're just doing band-aids. The system is not great.
How do you integrate faith into counselling.
Yeah.
Well, you know, you go to uni, you do a social work degree. It's, you know, it's kind of, it's got a framework and stuff. How do you then throw faith into something like medicine or psychology or social work?
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, big can of worms.
It is a big can of worms. It's hard to describe.
The other side of that being how important it is for people with faith to know that they can access counsellors, professionals who share their values.
Absolutely. So I guess that number one, when you're sitting in a counselling room, as you would know, or in with anybody that you're encountering with on a professional level, is you start where they're at, where the client is at. So I have clients who have a full-on faith, a beautiful Christian faith, and I'm not going to evangelize to them about my faith. I start where they're at. Start where they're at and where their issues are, and whether their issues, like the sort of work that I do, I work from an ACT perspective, which is acceptance commitment therapy. And that melds beautifully with the Christian faith, because it talks about your values and what are your values. And, you know, the crap that, am I allowed to swear? The crap that your life throws you sometimes puts you off your values. So counselling is all about bringing yourself back to that. Where are you feeling, you know, so your thoughts and your emotions and your behaviours, and working through that. And from a spiritual level as well, you know.
When you were talking about a biopsychosocial spiritual assessment for those people who didn't make the great decision of choosing social work, can you run people through, please, what a biopsychosocial assessment is? And that's something to me that's quite measurable, that if I did it, if I assessed somebody and you assessed somebody, we'd come to pretty much the same conclusions. How do you then throw in spiritual?
I ask them. I just say, so have you got a spirituality about you that underpins your life, that is important to you? And, you know, invariably they say, oh, no, I'm not religious. Oh, yes, I'm very religious. Because our society hasn't worked out that there's religion and spirituality are two different things, but they can be together. Does that make sense? So I'm a Christian, but I also did a grad dip in spirituality, you know, a post-grad to think about spirituality. So
how do you do it in spirit? Like what do you study? Like mist and ghost?
Right.
What? I mean, it's not measurable. It's not scientific. Is it?
No, it's not scientific. I guess it's based on your belief system, isn't it? And I'm a person who is very spiritual but not religious, will say that, you know, they like to meditate, they like to go into nature and feel grounded. And my Christian faith grounds me just like their spirituality grounds them.
Okay. I had heard that places like New Zealand, working with Indigenous people, they have that spiritual component just inbuilt to all their social justice.
And we're getting that more and more with our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander folk and their spirituality, how important that is.
Across the board then? I mean,
it should be, yeah. So, you know, I wouldn't go and talk to an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person without talking about their spirituality and them and their connection to country, who their mob is. You look at a person and go, okay, you look at their bio, have they got any illnesses? What are their diagnoses? Their health. Psychosocial is a little bit about their background of, you know, their childhood and their teenage years and their psychological makeup. Then the sociological bit, where you go, okay, your family unit, then the bigger system, you know, socioeconomic status or employment, education, how important all of that is to them. And then that's the spiritual. Yes, getting onto the spiritual. Where are they at spiritually? And what does that mean? Does spirituality mean anything to them? And if it doesn't, it's okay. I don't sort of say, well, you have to have one. I say, well, sometimes it's important for people. And I'm not saying, are you religious? I'm saying, is there a spirituality about you that that connects you, that grounds you, that connects you to other people. It might be, it might be your cycling group that you feel so connected to them, you wouldn't be able to live without it, and that doing exercise is a great way to meditate. You never know.
What if someone says, I'm an evangelical Christian, I believe in the literal interpretation of the Bible. How do you integrate those values into what we would call secular training? A lot of people have been warned against going outside of Christian circles to get help. Sorry. Particularly with emotional stuff, or particularly with spiritual, talking about your relationship with God with someone who doesn't necessarily share such strong values. And I
can understand that, and that's why I think people like me and quite a few other professionals like social workers and psychologists and occupational therapists, I think we're in a unique position to totally understand where they're coming from. That deep faith is so important, and the spiritual and the emotional, psychological are so wound up together.
How do you compare a relationship with Almighty God to your sciences from 100 years ago? Thinking of, I remember when I got in a little bit of, my life went a little bit off track in my 20s, and there was, all this hysteria, and people had suggested going to counselling, and I said to my mother, like, you should go to counselling then. And she said, I don't need counselling. God is my counsellor. And that was the end of the story. That was it. So, for someone like that, and I mean, she's a particularly private person. Anyway, what's the benefit in you then? Why should they talk to you when there's another fundamentalist Christian that understands?
I think because I'm one step removed, and objectivity, they've done studies, that I'm objective. I'm not going to put my personal opinion to them. I'm not from their community, so I'm absolutely removed. So they can talk what they like in my room. My room is
tempting, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my room is a sacred space. It's an absolute sacred space. No one is going to hear anything.
Okay.
It's confidential. Except, of course, if someone says they're going to kill themselves or kill somebody else, then of course, and that is also discussed, that the boundaries are there. The boundaries are very strict. And I think that's what's unique. It's not unique about me, but that's what's special, I think, about going to somebody who you don't know, but has a common faith.
See, I think that's so great in terms of, we've heard so many of these stories of people sharing, in a really vulnerable time with their pastor or the pastor's wife or somebody like that, and the information goes straight back to other people.
I find that my heart aches hearing that. I just think that's just horrible.
Really exposing people.
Yeah.
Where else can they go then for some private conversation?
Well, that's where systems need to be set up, I think. If a church is going to offer counselling, then you set it up within professional counselling guidelines. I mean, even the Christian Counselling Association has, guidelines to confidentiality, and you break them and you're in big trouble. Same with psychologists, same with social workers. We have guidelines, we have ethics.
Okay. And it's professional bodies that oversee those. Yeah. Well, there's all that controversy over the Catholic Church have said that they won't go along with reporting laws, I think. And
when they're in the confessional.
Yeah, they'll keep that sacred and they won't report.
I don't get that at all.
It's a concern for people, very much that church people traditionally look after their own.
I'm not connected, I guess, to a church institution.
Okay. Yeah. Even if you were a fundamentalist Christian and I'm a fundamentalist Christian, we're going to have two different understandings of what we do. And I just wonder how do you integrate that into counselling, which is It's the same thing.
I hear you. Yeah.
Year after year.
Yeah. And I guess the thing is, that apart from, you meet the client where they are, it's also holding back my belief system in a non-judgmental way. I think in that counselling session, there's this thing that goes on where I am actually, that being present with the person and hearing what they have to say, not judging it one way or the other, but saying, okay, well, is that sitting right with you? You're coming here because maybe it isn't sitting right with you.
That would be very difficult for a lot of people to know.
Yeah. And it wouldn't happen necessarily on the first session. It might take and it depends on their level of what they're bringing, what they're bringing,
mm-hmm.
and possible trauma that, I know that you've been talking about a lot over the last months.
A lot of people wouldn't even know what it is to think if anything's all right with them, because they've been taught, to decide whether everything's okay according to the book or according to a leader or someone's interpretation. Are you seeing people leaving churches and things like that? Or
I haven't seen as much. People are staying in, I've seen one person from a similar or the same. The people that I find are really struggling are the ones that are, say their son or daughter has said that they're gay, and coping, just this two polar things happening. They love their son or their daughter, but their faith is so committed to being anti-gay.
What do you do in counselling with that? How do you?
I do.
See, that's a great example. I mean, these are really set own values.
It's not easy, and it's about, they have to be true to their own values, but it takes a while, getting to a point where you go, I love my son and I love God. I'm going to have to be grey. I'm going to have to just sit there. But it's not for me to judge where they get to. It's the journey for themselves.
How does that happen? Tell me, please, if I'm a Christian, I'm listening to you now. I've never been to counselling before because I've never had anything major happen to me.
Yeah.
And I think you're manipulating people and watering down Christianity by making it grey. I don't understand. What are you telling me? Yeah,
well, then they might not come and see me, because the reality is that life is grey for me, and maybe that is my theology coming through in the work that I do. And you're right.
Yeah, I mean, how do you help people navigate things?
Possibly navigate it within their very black and white view.
Have you got anyone that comes to mind?
Yeah, okay, someone that no, I'll just make someone up. Someone who comes and they're very anxious and they do a lot of praying, and that doesn't seem to help, and very fundamental, black and white about their views. I would introduce the concept of Christ-centered mindfulness, which is a concept that, because often Christians have a view of the Eastern religions as being really bad, and we won't go there, and that's fair enough. That's what some people believe. We especially in the Protestant area, have thrown the baby out with the bathwater. So we actually have 2,000 years of history of contemplative prayer and beautiful ways to be mindful in an absolutely Christian perspective, Christian way. Be still and know that I am God. Being present and knowing that God is there. So I introduce a Christ-centered mindfulness for them to connect with God's creation, to connect with themselves, connect with others. And people love it. And a good friend of mine's written an amazing book. Can I plug it? Yep. It's called Christ-Centered Mindfulness. And it's by Dr. Catherine Thompson. And you can buy it at Koorong.
I mean, that's fantastic. That's a really beautiful example of how the two coexist and work together then for people.
And it doesn't have to be opposites. It doesn't have to clash within your very fundamentalist Christian perspective, which is, I'm not judging, that's where you're at.
Right.
You can tackle your anxiety, you can tackle your your stress with these strategies.
The aim of, and that was the old school understanding, I mean, the aim of your work is not to counsel people out of a relationship with God.
No, absolutely not. That fundamentally goes against my code of ethics as well, doesn't it?
Or to water it down, or to get them over to the uniting way of thinking.
No, absolutely not. Well, I guess the proof's in the pudding.
Yeah.
And it's about integrity, isn't it? And it's about saying out up front that, this is, again, what you say is confidential. This space is for you. What you say is important. You are the person who needs to be listened to. I have a wealth of knowledge and skills, but I'm not going to make you think my way of thinking of a worldview.
Such incredibly powerful things for people who may never have had that opportunity to have privacy and confidentiality, and to actually self-determine. That's a big old social work phrase, self-determination.
Yeah, self-determination,
make their
empowerment, agency. Absolutely.
They're not non-Christian values.
No. Yeah. I guess the other thing that I often say to Christians who, maybe self-deprecating or, don't see that they're, it's important to love yourself. And I just always come down to what Jesus said, that what are the two big commandments? To love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, which is body, mind, and spirit, and your neighbour as yourself. And I think we forget that as yourself bit so often. We can't love others and God if we're not loving ourselves. So working on loving ourselves is a really important aspect often in the therapy sessions.
Well, you'd be being disobedient then, wouldn't you, if you're not loving
yourself? Yeah, that's right, because it's a commandment.
Traditionally, people who haven't had much experience of therapists sold that whole idea of people lying on a couch and, sharing their secrets. And I, for years and years at a time.
Woody Allen.
Yeah, that whole thing.
Yeah.
And I think the kind of counselling that you're talking about isn't that kind of thing. Like it's...
No. Sometimes people come for one, but inevitably they come for more. Often it's under the mental health care plan, which is the the Medicare thing. People come for 6, and at the moment, because of COVID, we can extend it for another 10. I have a number of people who come from 2 or 3, right through to 20.
Yeah. How many do people need?
Depends on what I guess what they bring to the table. A person came the other day saying, I've lost all this money, I've been scammed. Just by sitting down with one session, talking about it, also confessing to family and finding that so cathartic and helpful, and getting on an antidepressant. The second session, we just concluded that he was doing okay. That I didn't cure him. He just had a chance to sit with a stranger and go blah.
I mean, that's a holistic approach. That's not just, being yelled at and told you've done a wrong. You were
showing compassion and, I guess, empathy in that space. He already felt bad enough. And then also, the good social work stuff of referring on to other places that are going to help. I think we often forget to do that. So
again, transparency and not keeping it in-house. And
that's right.
Yeah, I mean, all you need is for someone in your family when you're at a church to work there or volunteer there, and if you're in counselling there with somebody and a file gets leaked, and that would frighten me enough not to participate.
Same. Yeah. And then if too many stories of participating and then it going really badly, and not appropriate processes to follow through with, the secular world. So I grew up not making, being very anti-secular spiritual, that dualism in life.
Okay.
So I have this philosophy that all of life is to be given to God's glory, whether you're a garbage collector or the Prime Minister.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I don't talk about secular music and spiritual music and worship. I think everything you do is worship. So I'm always coming against that evangelical Pentecostal viewpoint anyway. So is your behaviour going against your value system? And I'm assuming that's why you're here.
That makes, okay.
Yeah. I'm not there to absolve anyone.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, people aren't going to radically change a belief system. They're not going to lose their faith, and they're not going to find a faith regularly, because that works in terms of mental health as well, which is, as James was saying last week, like whether it's in context.
Yep, absolutely. The mental state examination is like, it is fascinating when someone has hallucinations or set delusions, and it's so interesting that they're often within the context of their culture. So you will believe you're Mary, mother of Jesus, if you're in a Catholic system, or you might believe that you're Muhammad if you're in a Islamic system. So those
you don't see people in India being paranoid about the CIA.
No, that's right. Yeah, it is all fascinating, but you have to work, like I guess James was talking about last week, is, you know, through assessment is working out whether it's more a personality issue or a actual psychotic.
I really like that idea that you can meld the two, meeting people where they're at, which is again very different from, you know, the fundamentalist Christianity says you better get over here and meet me where I am and where we expect you to be. Yeah.
And then everything will be fine and you'll be happy.
And that's the end.
Yeah.
And then that idea of working with people on their own value systems, what's important to them, that's not going to upset the apple cart or rip anybody's faith away from them. In fact,
absolutely
the opposite from what you're saying. Hey, it's reinforcing.
Yeah. And look, whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, whoever comes, they've never had counselling before. It's pretty scary walking into a counselling room. And I have, you know, I had someone the other day, she was so anxious, but she came back and she was so much better. I said, what's changed? She goes, oh, I know what I'm finding. I know who you are now, and I'm much more better. I'm better because I know what I'm to expect. I don't like going to counselling.
Oh, no.
The ones that come along, they go, oh, it's not too bad. Got to process sometimes through talking, I think.
That all really does make so much sense. I have been thinking for a while about, you know, more vulnerable people who exist in the fundamentalist world, in the evangelical world, women with children, anybody who people know where they're going, you know, someone who might want to go to counselling, but they don't get any free time, and people are going to say, exactly, who are you talking to and sharing our secrets with? Somebody with no faith or different faith. And that's why just talking to Jay about the value of counselling, just as simply as that, has been so wonderful. Sarah was talking on another podcast about being really, really kind of hesitant about talk therapy due to having been involved in all these kind of manipulative pastor circles. And, you know, she's like, I want therapy for my trauma, but I don't trust these people because I know the techniques.
Of course, there's art therapy, which is absolutely beautiful. You know, less talk and more coming from your subconscious, doing work, putting it out on paper or using clay, and also using that for trauma, because, of course, you know, trauma is all about not being connected, you know, your body, mind and spirit not being connected and not being grounded. So using beautiful art therapy for that sort of thing. I'm not an art therapist as such, but I love using anything that's tactile, even colouring in, that sort of thing, clay work, just to get people.
There's so many different options. I went on a social work placement and I was sent as a student to support a client who was quite unwell in a pottery class. And I didn't know I could do pottery, and I loved it. I couldn't do pottery if you saw it, but
it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. It's
right.
The symbolism of what comes up for you.
Yeah, it was amazing. And you can find inside you when you try. So it was crazy.
And of course, I just remembered one of my favorite therapeutic tools is my box of Playmobil small figurines. When you were little, you had Lego. That was a bit too small, but the European small figurines, I use that, and people can get their subconscious and what they think, with asking them questions like doing something like memory, like going down memory lane and remembering parts of your life and putting yourself out on a board as a little figurine. And that's another way to get people, using cards, using teddy bears if they're children or young people. Using that artistic side of things is just beautiful, and
just so many different approaches, for people to access something, and it doesn't have to conflict with anything that's precious to people.
If you believe in God, God has made people He is the creator. She is the creator, and that made us very creative as well. So using our creativity in this space of learning about yourself and coping with life, I think, is a lovely way to go.
There's a lot of people in crisis, and often in faith communities, there's really no access to kind of mainstream services that could help people as well. And counselling often, fits in that role. Hey, where someone will go to see a counsellor, but they'll know a lot of the other places to go next. Yeah.
That referral service stuff.
Yeah. It's just invaluable with someone like you who's had these years of experience, and who's where and who does what.
Yeah. What I can recommend, if people don't know and are desperate, go to your local neighbourhood house. It's sort of church for non-Christians, really.
Okay.
It's, the places where you can go and be connected, and they will be able to refer you on to the next where to go. The other thing is your GP. Your GP should be knowing what the services are in the area.
When do you break the confidentiality?
If they're quite unwell, and they're unwell mentally, so on the brink of thinking that they might want to take their own life because of the level of stress that they're under. I'm a lone operator. I'm a sole trader. I am not a crisis service. I can't support them day and night. I work collaboratively with people. I wouldn't just do it without telling them. I would say, hey, this is remember the thing that we talked about at the very beginning, when you signed that piece of paper about confidentiality, we really need to talk to someone else. But this is what I plan to do. I'm going to ring the CAT team, or I really think that you need follow-up services. And I know it's scary, but there are people around you who can help you, and you really need support in this area.
I love that collaborative word.
Yeah.
So so what if they say no, I don't want to go? Then
I'll say, well, it's my duty of care to actually ring, and then it's your choice. Unless that then the whole, in that scenario, the whole Mental Health Act comes into play, or if they're underage and they've disclosed sexual abuse.
Okay.
You have to do something.
I mean, and those are laws, but there's a lot of comfort, I'm thinking, to know that there are places where people can go and they're not going to get, some mixed up response. They're going to get the same legislation every time. Legislation
with care and love. I'm not doing it against you. I'm doing it because it's part of.
Sure, but I'm thinking about domestic violence where, women know that at least if they came to you, it's not going to be swept under the carpet and close ranks, that you have to, even if you don't want to, you follow the law.
Yeah, that's right.
That's wonderful.
We live in the world. I know we're not supposed to be of the world, but we do live in the world.
I mean, most people don't have as much hesitation going to a mainstream GP or, getting a mechanic to fix your car and not doing it yourself.
And it's interesting how mental health is so taboo compared to, say, if you've got diabetes, you'll go to your GP and get medication for that.
We're just out of that generation that, would say, oh, what, you're going to a counsellor, you're going to a psychiatrist, you must be something very wrong with you. And that wasn't a long time ago. And I'm pretty grateful that the next generation are really just smashing that stigma out there.
And talking about it, not even hiding that, saying, I'm out there doing that, and it's really helpful. So you should too.
Again, connectedness is so key, connecting people, getting them out of isolation. Petra, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Tanya. It's been absolutely wonderful meeting you and chatting.
Such a wonderful perspective, so important. Thank you for sharing it. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah, no problem at all.
Okay, thank you.
No worries.
Bye.
I'll catch you later. Catch you on the flip side.
Bye.
Yeah.
And a big thank you to Petra, who took a bunch of questions like a tennis ball machine from all kind of angles, because these are some really complex issues. But above all, it's really important to get help with people who are professional and people who are trained and know what they're doing. And it's really okay to do that. While we're on the topic of mental health, make sure you check out the saturdaypaper.com.au from last week, where I put a little piece in about PTSD and former Hillsong members, because it's time to start naming the harm that's done. That was also matched up with an appearance on the 7 a.m. podcast. So check those out if that's your interest. Or even if it's not, just go and check it out. Like, share, subscribe, do all those things. Please follow us, support us, help us. And this week's episode has an amazing sponsor, but I will tell you all about them next week. Until then, please take care of yourselves. Keep being kind to each other. Be kind to yourself. Give yourself a break. And keep leaving Hillsong. And we'll talk soon. Bye.